Hi, everyone. So welcome to our part two of Honoring Your Well-Being here for our Promo at Home series. Um, my name is Samadhi Niyamcha. I'm the manager of public policy at Promo. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'll be moderating our panelists today who have returned back with us, which we're excited to have them. And on my screen, it's Kelly, Chad, and Riot. So can we do introductions in that direction? Kelly can go first.
Yes. My name is Storck, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a therapist. I have a private practice in Webster Groves. I see a lot of trans and non-binary folks, including small children and their families. Yeah, I guess that's it. And I'm working telehealth full-time now.
Okay. Welcome, Kelly. Chad Keller here. And so I am also a therapist here or a psychologist here in private practice. I do this on a part-time basis. So I see folks about 2 days a week. Otherwise, I work full-time in higher education at a community college in Illinois. And so like Kelly, a good amount of my folks fall somewhere under that LGBTQ umbrella. But unlike Kelly, my folks tend to be kind of later teenagers into kind of the 20, 30, 40 something kind of demographic. So.
Hi, y'all. My name is Riot. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a helpline trainer for Squish, the St. Louis Queer Support Helpline. And my background is social work. I think my commencement was about an hour ago, the recorded version of it. So, yeah, happy to be here.
And congratulations.
Congratulations.
Riot.
On time. Congratulations. So, we'll just jump right in. So this is part two of what we've already done before, and wanted to jump in with a question about what have some of your favorite or most effective coping mechanisms that you have practiced to improve your mental health well-being at home?
I'll start. I have noticed with this won't be true for everyone, but with more space and time, myself and many of my clients will, many upon my urging, really been trying to explore some more time to do breath work and meditation or introduce or do some more yoga. I think practicing or embracing stillness when, as the world has slowed down has been really important. I know it's a panic for many people. It feels like, or they are in crisis. I have found actually a lot of my folks are doing fairly well. And then that I think it's a period of expansion around mental health, that we are really recognizing what we were or weren't doing that was working or not working. And we have a little space and time to do whatever we were missing. So I hope that people are trying to lean in where they can.
Yeah, and I think, because I didn't know as far as whether the question's kind of like what works for us or what's working for the people that we may come in contact with. And, and as Kelly kind of pointed out, it's like, what works for one may not work for another. And, from a kind of my standpoint, from a professional standpoint, I'm at a fairly stable place. So I'm not struggling in terms of economically, like there hasn't been a disruption from COVID because of that. And that also then too, personally speaking, kind of within my personal circle, it's not necessarily directly affected people. My loved ones all have the privilege of being able to do telework or to go in on a limited basis. And so, I think like Kelly said, there's a lot of stillness, and that is unnerving. And I think that, especially for folks that have, a lot of kind of rejection and bullying and trauma narratives and such. And I think it's trying to not be overwhelmed by those voices in our heads during this time, and kind of a trial and error process of figuring out what actually is helpful in maybe turning down the volume a little bit. Especially because, like Kelly said, a lot of our past ways of coping with them, healthy or unhealthy, are being kind of taken away from us. And so, like, for me, I know what kind of works, but I've also had 20 years of being in this field. I've had my own therapy to kind of figure that out. And so, and of course, how I deal with it now is totally different than, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So.
I appreciate how you both named stillness, because my go-to was kind of movement. Not that those have to be like polar opposites, but I know I've personally found days where I like get outside and find ways to like activate a little bit. I'm a lot more comfortable with the stillness. I roll my eyes at this because I've always rolled my eyes when people say like exercise, but it's something I've started doing more recently that's actually been really helpful. And I guess like lowering the barrier for what counts as exercise has been helpful too. So just start wherever you can, and whatever feels good. And along with that, and what we talked about a lot last time, was like that self-compassion piece and trying to not judge myself if I'm sitting on the couch for 4 hours and watching Netflix. Like, that's okay. And I know I also talked a lot about like small feasible goals last time. So I think that as well, like, if you're trying to like bring some movement into your system and activate a little bit, maybe a walk around the block is where you're starting with, and just not judging yourself for starting there. And then rewarding yourself again for that effort of doing it. And then the other thing is like just knowing that everyone's struggling right now, and knowing that we're up against a lot. I mean, we're up against everything we were up against pre-pandemic. A lot of our communities were in a crisis before this current crisis. And reminding myself that healing isn't going to be linear, right? Like some of these strategies that we're going to share, you might try once or twice and like don't really notice a difference. Maybe you feel a little bit better, and then the third or fourth time you do it, you feel worse, and you kind of just have to keep practicing. It's really like a grind, and it's super frustrating that that's what we have to do, but just committing to those practices, because the gains are really small.
Samadhi, if you will also, I remember last time I talked about, or we sent out I made a bit of a self-care checklist around COVID-19. So if people want that, again, a way to check in, of course, for the life of me, I can't remember. It's movement, nourishment, time to just be, and there's some other fourth one, which I'm sure is equally important that I cannot remember. But it helps people have a little checklist if you use it daily, or if you just use it as a tool to go, oh, right, these are the things I need to be looking for. Kind of helps figure out what's working, what's not working, what are my needs. I think if we're just staying tuned in and attending to what we need the most, whether, that's movement or stillness, then we just trying to do the best we can in each moment.
I will try to find that and then get it in here.
Or I can resend it to you.
Oh, that works too. We had a question in the chat I wanted to go to before we move on, and I'm not sure what everyone's level of expertise is with substance abuse, but one of our watchers, I guess, they're curious about the availability of behavioral addiction support / processing groups that are meeting online. I know I've seen some of that, but I'm wondering what you all have seen or heard about that.
So I have some folks who are working the AA program, or someone who's been very curious about, kind of an observer to the AA process, who have really, who are either continuing to be served or who have really leaned in. That brings me great joy to see how helpful that's been. And again, I think people might have a little more space and time to really utilize that. So I have someone who's really benefiting from online AA meetings.
Yeah, and I'm just aware that it's moved online for the AA programs, but otherwise beyond that, with any of the other kind of resources or centers, that I don't know where they're at with any of their kind of outpatient type of programs that they have in place.
Yeah, maybe if that participant has a more specific request, we might be able to respond. But I do know AA is doing or at least I have someone having a really positive experience there. But it's true. I'm sure there are many other pockets that might not have made that transition.
Yeah, I see a new comment in the chat that this was about gambling or porn. I offhand don't know any resources. The one that came to mind immediately was again for substance use. And I know, and this isn't like supporter processing groups, but NCADA has like a lot of online webinars. But yeah, that's all I know really.
Yeah, so I know there is, I'm gonna chop up, I don't know what they call it anymore. Sex something anonymous or the Gamblers Anonymous. I don't know how well established those are if they're online, but that would be a place to look. And it could be as simple as a, gambling online support group Google search.
Well, and let me, because actually in my, in Tower Grove South, there is and I'm of course blanking on the name of it, but there is I'll just say kind of like AA clubhouse. And I walk past it quite a bit. And I do know that, or I believe once when I was looking at their different programs, that they do, different programs, whether, I can't say definitively whether it's for porn or gambling, but I know that they had kind of various groups. So let me find out what the name of that club is, and then I can just share that with Samadhi. And we can see whether they have, some of those additional types of groups.
Sarah, do you think that's called Step Solano? Does that ring a bell?
Yes, that's the one. That's the one.
That might be a place to check.
Yeah, that is the one.
Yeah, because I think all of them are focused. Yeah.
Just found that and we'll put it in the chat for everyone. Sorry about the disconnect, still playing with the internet here sometimes. Okay, so we had some questions that came in before the panel. Well, let me make sure. Right, did you have anything to add in case I missed it before? Okay. We had a couple of questions coming ahead of time. One person specifically said the following: I'm already really anxious. Keeps me going. It's just this last month has especially been hard. I'm back with my family who are accepting, but I'm still trying to figure out some things out as well as complete school. Any suggestions?
So can we talk, I had lots of, I think we're moving into, I don't know if it's round 2 or 3 or phases of this. So my sense is, and I don't know if that person is here, if they're physically distanced, like if they were at school and had friends, but I'm starting to have conversations with people about risk reduction. And if they've been really cautiously quarantining and they're like, I really like, what's up with all this opening up? I'm not ready to do that. But I think we really have to think about sustainability, because I think we'll be living with some form of this or needing to be aware of this for a year or two. So I think everybody's going to have to start making decisions for themselves about where they can go or how they start to have social visits. We are blessed right now. I don't even want to think about dead of winter, that we can get outside and those interactions are a lot safer. People can wear masks. People are going on walks. Totally preference about your own safety, but runs, bikes with other folks, or, sitting 6 to 10 feet apart on a porch or across a driveway. I think that that needs to be allowable. 2 months is a long time. And if we're looking at, many, many more months, the way we did quarantine immediately, or the way it sounded in March, will need to look different in May or June. I also have a lot of people who are getting pretty creative about how they're connecting online. All sorts of these kind of like Zoom meetings but also I have a lot of folks who are super into gaming, and so they're getting servers together and getting able to share. That's how little I know. I don't know how you talk about that. I don't know. They're all getting a server.
Yes. I'm with you. Yeah, they're doing that somehow.
They're doing it.
Well, yeah, and I think that, yeah, and the quarantining there's going to be an ebb and a flow to perhaps what this is going to be looking like, depending on where it goes. And then, of course, weather factors in. And yeah, the way that I've started to think about it, and some clients have started to think about it, is like, well, we now wear seatbelts, okay? I don't know about for Kelly, but it's like, I grew up without seatbelts. And then you're like, yes, okay. So I'm going to do that, and I'm still going to drive. And same thing as far as with like sunscreen and those types of things. Now, of course, there's still so much unknown about this, but I think, taking it in increments of what feels like manageable for you to start to kind of socially engage or go out into the world. And maybe it is just with going to a park versus going to a store. And I think also then being prepared or aware, especially if you, this person already shared feeling more anxious, is when people aren't doing social distancing and they're infringing upon your space, kind of being prepared for how you're going to handle that. Both from an anxiety standpoint, but then perhaps some of that like frustration and anger that can come up when you see people kind of disregarding that.
I also think there's a danger that we're starting to hit if you're not trying any of these things, if you're feeling a need to get out, or I had someone who was like, I really just want to run to the nursery. I want to go pick out some plants, but I'm not sure that's okay. And I think the need that exists and then not allowing themselves to do that enhances or bolsters this idea that it can't possibly be safe. And I think that there are really reasonable, safe ways that we can go spend 30 minutes at a nursery, or that we can go get our groceries. I think we do know a lot of the science, maybe not very specific to COVID, but we've long lived with illness, and we do know a lot of ways to keep ourselves safer. It's not that easy. I mean, we'd have to walk around chomping, vapor out of people to get, if you are careful about what you touch and you are wearing a mask and most other people are wearing a mask, we can be quite safe outside. And in short,
but I will say though, you can go out there, and because I've had this with colleagues, it's like there's quite a few people not wearing masks, depending on your pockets of where you go to the grocery store, or if you're in Tower Grove Park, I can see it, but in other areas, my friends and colleagues are saying, nope, especially as you start moving out.
There's for certainly people saying, oh, it looks totally normal here. And I'm like, oh yeah, no. I'm not ready.
It's an ongoing, I was just going to say,
right?
it's like an ongoing assessment. Just being real with yourself that there's no way to move through the world with no level of risk. So what feels right for you, it might feel different for someone else. Like those social distance hangs in a park, is that like necessary for your wellness? If yes, then like find ways to do that safely. I always come back to the idea of safety planning, which I think sounds like really scary and maybe unnecessary, but a safety plan is just like, what can I do to reduce harm or make myself a little bit safer in this situation? And then I think there are just a ton of strategies for reducing like personal anxiety. So if you're figuring out like what feels right and important for you in terms of socializing or, moving through the world outside of your apartment or wherever it is you are quarantined right now, like play around with that anxiety. And like maybe I misunderstood the question. I thought it was more about like, what can I do to lower anxiety? So that's where my mind went, was like, different types of movement or like somatic experiencing things that you can do with yourself to prepare yourself to go outside. And with that like idea in mind that anytime you are giving yourself or your body more agency or choice, you're kind of reducing anxiety.
And you reserve the right to reassess and make a different move depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, because I think that was one of the things that popped into mind, that, yeah, when we're talking about like social or the non-essential stuff, keeping in mind the reassessing, and you can just get out, like whether it's the nursery. Now, of course, with work, that may be, that can be challenging depending on what your work environment is going to be. If it feels then that agency is getting taken away because your managers or bosses are saying, no, can't. So.
I feel like we answered that person's question, but I just wanted to toss something in there. Riot brought up safety planning, which I think is really important. And I know that especially with like the climate, what's happening, and like it seems less now, but the blaming of like Asian Americans or Chinese people for the virus, definitely as an Asian American, is part of my like leaving the house. Like my partner is white, and we walk my dog together. We try to make sure we go to the grocery store if we need to go out together, just so we can kind of tag team that in a way, because they're also trans and non-binary. So it's like there's like a mixed layer of like general like concern for safety. So we kind of, as part of our kind of safety planning, we try to double team that and work on that together, which is also really important. But I'll move on to a second question. This is someone who, they just moved here from Minneapolis in February, and now they're starting to feel really isolated and not having a chance to meet new people. They wanted kind of any recommendations for support groups or ways to connect with people online during this time of social distancing.
Well, and I know Kelly sent that one resource out. And then I know folks, I know of some folks that were doing but I feel like they were national Zoom meetups that were for queer individuals. I wasn't aware. I know that, for MTUG, for Metro Trans Umbrella Group, they're still doing social, there's different kind of support and resource groups and connections that way. But in terms of like, I didn't see anything when I was looking as far as like through Pride Center here, in terms of any type of kind of social meetup and connection.
That's what I think is going on for my folks. You either have the privilege of having some kind of social network, and so they're really leaning in there. This person doesn't have that. I have two thoughts. I have some folks who have gone out and even gotten on to what we might think of as only dating sites, but also just looking for connection or friendship and having some success there. Or I have folks that are quarantining alone and really leaning into this isolation in a way of like spiritual retreat. So again, it's not a direct answer to that person's question, but it's an answer to, if you have a hard time finding these social connections, kind of reharnessing that energy to what could it mean for you to retreat with yourself, and are there layers of depth in that might be what you really can get right now.
Yeah.
Because I think stuff I'm sure feels very hard right now.
I think like a couple of my best friends in the world are people I met on Tinder. I think maybe, I don't know if it's a queer trans thing, that there's a little bit more openness to making friends on what is otherwise labeled a dating app. But I think that's a great suggestion. I know, like someone mentioned, MTUG has, I think, identity-based support groups that are moving online. The queer exchange groups on Facebook that are like St. Louis specific, I'm sure there are some like in Illinois as well, can be a great way to like just connect with people. You can always call the St. Louis Queer Support Helpline if you need to talk to a peer. That's kind of what it's for, a peer-based line. I would also say like leaning into volunteer opportunities. You could volunteer with Squish or St. Louis Mutual Aid, and kind of have these like project or task-based ways to stay in community with people, especially if like, you know, I know St. Louis Mutual Aid is doing a lot of pod or neighborhood-based organizing. So that's a great way to feel connected to your neighbors, even if you're not physically with them. And then I would just kind of do an inventory of sorts of like, what is it you're looking for from social connection? What are those needs? And then how can you fill those gaps or meet those needs? Even if they feel a little bit half measure right now, like a Zoom hangout, might feel like not entirely what you want, but are you meeting some of those needs, and just kind of like cross them off your list?
Mhm.
I really like the idea of doing an inventory. Like, I think that's a helpful exercise. So this is something that we at Promo were thinking of in terms of, to kind of go back to that managing anxiety or maybe fear, genuine fear. Parts of the state are already opening back up to business as usual, while other cities like St. Louis is doing a soft reopening next week, and we have, I believe Kansas City is also planning something similar as well. How do we manage our fear around this pandemic while also fulfilling our obligations to work, family, etc., while moving forward, or we're trying to move forward?
I think, you know, safety planning and that sort of risk assessment I was talking about. So like maybe you have to work and this is that you can't avoid. Is there a risk in another area of your life that you can remove now? So you're like +1 risk, -1 risk. Yeah, and then again, like we talked about, those things that might feel necessary, like a social distancing in the park, but like if you spread that out 2 or 3 weeks instead of doing that weekly, does that feel a little bit better for you? Yeah, like safety planning, start with that question of where do I feel safe and what makes me feel safe? And again, you can always like reach out to some of these support groups, MTUG, Squish, to help you with that safety plan. So, okay, I have to go grocery shopping. What can I do to stay safe or feel safer while I'm in the grocery store?
But I think you're right. I think, right, it's a bit of a numbers game, and it's a balancing act of if you have to be at work and that takes on as much or more risk than you really want to be taking on, and as a whole, you go, okay, well, I'm doing that so I can be more financially secure or okay. And so right now I may need to compromise the way I'm doing things socially, or I may need to get this delivery or curbside pickup because I'm already taking on as much exposure as I want through work, which sucks. But again, hopefully is for some kind of good reason that you go, I need to be financially secure right now, so this is what I'm going to do. But I feel like I've filled my my risk around exposure. It's weird and terrible math to have to do, but it is our current reality.
And I also think that assessing, or if there are aspects of your job where you think there are some measures that potentially your work, I mean, and this is all going to be based off of your workplace, the size of a company, in terms of, is there a way for you to communicate, like in terms of what maybe some of those, where some of the gaps are in what you feel like are those CDC guidelines or other guidelines in terms of keeping a workplace kind of safe, or like, especially I've been having that conversation with people that are doing those customer service type jobs, like, well, what does your workplace say when folks don't respect social distancing? How do they want you to handle that? So that was kind of something that had popped into mind when folks were talking about those. And then, one other thing too that we were talking about like opening back up, and I think because I've heard this through some work conversations with students and even with clients, is for those of you that are then living with people that have different values around this, that then, especially as things, do reopen, I think that that's something that, we have to kind of toss out there is going to be something really challenging to navigate through when people have different risk or assessment or tolerance levels. And if you're like the child in the relationship, even if you're 20, 25 years old or 30 years old, and they're like, well, it's my house, so if you don't like it, get out and stuff, figuring out how to manage that then.
You know, I want to make a point that I think we talked about last time, which I really enjoyed. And I've had a lot of my clients, as I've either shared it with them or they've brought it up. There is something about folks who have struggled with mental health or who have trauma histories that really have prepared them to do this. There is a skill set and a knowledge around having to navigate hardship and difficulty that is looking pretty good on folks. They're like, I know what it is to have to give stuff up, or how to, if I cannot change that I'm in a poor situation, then how I then try to resource and support myself. I mean, it's really either can I change the thing that I don't like is happening, and we can't change the nature of COVID. We may not be able to change what the people in our house are doing or what they're doing at the park. And then we know, like, if I can't actively change what is the underlying issue, then I go to supporting the heck out of myself as I'm asked to do something that's less than ideal. And I think queer folks and folks who have struggled with mental health and folks who carry trauma they've exercised this muscle a lot. And I think that this is potentially another way that they'll do that again, and may even feel like they have some gift or experience that helps them do that. And I think that feels a little empowering for people when they make that connection.
Yeah, I think that's happening a little bit more now that we're kind of later into quarantine too. I think in the early throes of it, at least I know, like, in navigating my own like mental health and like talking with my therapist, we switched gears a lot. It was like, how do we like cope with the current fears, the current stress, the fatigue, the grief, etc., and being really creative about like, how can we connect? And now that we're acclimating a little bit more and going back to that like deeper trauma history work, etc. So I think other people are doing that too. They're going back to what they originally came to therapy for, which of course can be like painful and hard, but it can be kind of nice to like see that progress or apply things you've learned a year ago, 5 years ago, to a new pandemic, to a new situation.
You know, one thing though I do want to add though is I think though that partially is all based off of where you're at in recognizing and affirming your own resiliency. And so like I can see that with my clients, but they don't connect yet to that they've had these traumatic or horrible experiences throughout life. And so when their family members or people around them dismiss their concerns, it's just reactivation a lot for that. And I think, so that's where I think, like, yeah, for those folks that are a little bit further along with owning their resiliency or seeing it, yeah, buckling down, turning inward has been helpful. But then for others, it's just this whole like playing back out of crap that they had to deal with at various points from these same family members or partners even that have, gaslit them and said, you're just being hysterical. I'm right, you're wrong. So I just wanted to point that out because I don't want anybody that's listening to be like, well, I don't have that resiliency. Something must be wrong with me. And it's like, like Riot said, they have that resiliency partially perhaps, or a recognition of that from therapy. I do too for my own therapy. But of course, for some of you, if you haven't had that experience yet, these words may not quite be where you're at right now.
Right. The people I'm thinking about, I'm pulling from folks I tend to see people in long-term relationships, and they have a lot of privileges even that they're able to be in therapy. So yeah. I appreciate when we try to go back to like folks who are feeling more oppressed or marginalized.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, especially if you talk about folks who maybe have never been able to access like a sense of safety. This can be a really difficult conversation, especially if you're talking about like your nervous system and like how do you access that sense of safety. If your goal is to move through the world and manage, you know, your responses to these things that are super heightened right now because we are in a crisis that we can't really escape. So it's really about just building on whatever it is there and take it slow, which feels like a really unsatisfying response.
Here's what I want to know. When is Riot going to be able to see clients? Congratulations on that new Master of Social Work, but dang, Riot.
I'm looking for a job right now.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering a similar question as
Like,
what you said, but I'm going to move to kind of a really broader question, and even though I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, I don't feel like this was covered anywhere, but like the future feels really uncertain right now in like countless ways. And what are the best or some of the best practice coping mechanisms for that uncertainty?
So I would again do an inventory of like what does feel certain for you. It's funny I say this because these are things I never do myself. I never put pen to paper and I'm like so strategic, but like write down things that you do know, things that maybe are stable or haven't changed for you, as a way to like remove uncertainty from your life. I think movement also can be really helpful here. Something my therapist told me, I don't know like how true it is, but I want to believe it, is that slower movement is great for like mental clarity, and more like frenetic energy, like higher energy activation is great for kind of moving through emotions and getting fatigued. And getting fatigued can be a really way to get your mind off uncertainty. And then the other thing I would say is kind of that like mindfulness lens of come into a relationship with your uncertainty, challenge your need for certainty in some areas, or examine like what's beneath it. Maybe it's a need for like control or security or safety, and where can you provide those things in your life? Even if it's just for 1 hour a day, this 1 hour block feels really certain and safe for me, and that can feel good. I would also ask you to like ask yourself when you felt really uncertain before, and what did you do to cope then?
Okay, like I said, and there you go. Riot handled that. And we're done.
Yeah, and I think that if you're feeling uncertain, I mean, we do not like that as creatures. I mean, like, we do not like that as creatures. And that, of course, we're all at different places with things that do feel certain or don't feel certain. And, you know, one of the things that I was reading before the last one was something that psychologist Tara Brock said, which is like the only thing, I don't like the word control, and maybe that was not even a word used, but the only thing that you can control is your breath. And I'm like, well, sometimes you can't even control your breath when you're so fearful, but the only thing you can kind of manage, or one of the foundational things. So I do keep that in mind when I am even feeling uncertain. Is okay. Because yeah, like Riot said, sometimes we say these things to folks and it's like, crap, I don't even do this when I'm in the thick of things. Yeah. And so the breath thing has been helpful. And you know, and one of the other things that I always keep in mind too is, and this is tied a little bit to what Riot mentioned, but is that if you're feeling uncertain about COVID or about a lot of things, yes, it's definitely about COVID. Chances are it's also about stuff from before that's getting all simmered up. So it's like, yes, it's about COVID, but no, it's not about COVID, because it's about perhaps these other times or these unresolved ways that are still struggling with uncertainty. And so maybe that's why, just to kind of normalize, maybe that's why the volume is so darn loud for you, and it's not for your partner, it's not for your family member. matters. And it's like, well, because it is about the present COVID, but it's also about this unresolved stuff.
I'd also think this is a good place to start to think about watching the stimulus, assessing what's coming in, and are you getting the stuff that you need? Watching our relationship to social media and media, and are we getting the messages around, look, like, yes, this is really different. Generations of people have done this before us. Some things will change for a long time, but we will also get through this. Like we already know something will be different in 3 months. Something will be really different in 1 to 2 years. It really, I mean, but if you are like, I'm prepared to get evicted, or I lost my job, I get that you're like, look, lady, I'm talking about freaking yesterday, not this idea. But again, I love this. What do you have? Do you just have your breath? Do you have the knowledge that you are safe and well in any given moment, and trying to work from there and bring in whatever else, trying to ease the spaces that say this is really, really bad and I'm not sure it's going to get better.
Yeah, I might also bring in, I don't know if this is somatic experiencing, but like if you're labeling uncertainty as a feeling, like what's the sensation in your body? And maybe it's all over. Maybe it's like the butterflies in the stomach and your palms are sweaty and your knees feel like wobbly. Choose one of those, right? And try to like label it, even if it doesn't make sense. Like, okay, butterflies in my stomach, what color are they? They're purple, they're spiky, they're about the size of a softball. Sit with that and then try to do whatever you can, like maybe like move your wrists really slowly, like, and then come back to that feeling and note if it's changed at all. And maybe the change will be like really, really slight, but you just did something there to move or shift in your body. And it might feel really slight. It might feel really like dissatisfying that it's still there. But if it's lessened even a little bit, I think that's a way of like processing that feeling of uncertainty, because the truth is like, we're in an uncertain time. Like there's a lot of uncertainty. You're not going to like all of a sudden feel really like safe and secure about everything.
But it does teach you, Riot, that we can participate with it, that there is a way for us to create a relationship with that. And if we continue to try that, we can find ways that we get any kind of comfort or ease from that. I think like smells and oils that way. Right now, what I did not have on my desk 2 months ago, which I now have, I have a candle that's constantly burning. I have chimes and a salt lamp and a room clearing, like, I don't know, like sage. Oh, I have sage and a like spray. Heck, it like, that seems kind of funny, doesn't it? Like,
well, no, I have my candle next to me too.
this connection to, if I am struggling, there is something I can do. And even the act of me wanting to take care of myself or to feel better feels like some kind of power that I do have.
You know, and one thing too, I want to just, because I made a note of this too, like, I mean, and I think Kelly probably attests to it. It's not that like I smell my pine candle and I'm like, oh, but it's like, it, at least for that second, reminds me of my childhood and pine trees, you know? And so don't feel like, well, yeah, I light the damn candle and then I'm still like feeling uncertain. Something must be wrong with me because these experts said that that's supposed to do it. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't. It's not, maybe the way that I think of it, it doesn't maybe necessarily, it decreases or it increases my hopefulness. That the uncertainty
lets you be with uncertainty in a different way. I don't think we're talking about this gets rid of it. It is that we will love and comfort and connect with ourselves and that experience in ways that feel a little bit more gentle or empowered.
Well, yeah, because, and I just wanted to point that out though, because I've had clients that were like, I can't do meditation because my mind is still racing when I do it, and I'm doing it wrong. And it's like, well, no, actually, it's not going to eliminate it. Like, and so you're not doing it wrong.
I think it can be really empowering to like light the candle. I made my room smell this way. And when the world's a mess, like I'm doing it, but sometimes like making my space not a mess is like the one thing that I can control. So do some cleaning, you know, like take care of your space, lighting. I did that, like kind of name that you made a choice to transform your space a certain way and you accomplished that.
I think there's an awful lot of power in nature that way, that at least in the moment, because so don't get too large scale, but you walk out and you go, okay, the sun came up today, or the rain fell from the sky, or the birds chirp. I didn't have to make them do that. Nothing's required of me. I don't have to demand that. All I have to do is go outside and avail myself to it. And even if it is really hot or really cold or gray, something you don't like, you go, but the world does still work. I think it's this remembering that not everything is scary and not everything is dangerous, and that there are things that don't depend on us that will continue to work.
I went to Benton Park a few weeks ago and saw a collection of duck eggs, and then I went a week later and saw a bunch of little ducklings, and it was just so nice. I know that, you know, we're making a lot of memes about like nature is healing, we're the virus, in a joking way because capitalism is the virus. But it's nice to see like nature being nature. I don't know, it helps.
And also like the big things, gardening and baking. Again, I liked when you said, right, that happened. You're like, I made that bread or that sweet, or like I planted that flower and it looks different than it did yesterday, or that plant like grows, or you're like, or that you go and take care of it and water it. I also think there's this really cool thing about the things that we've often undervalued, music, art, like the environment, the ways that we were living before really seem to under or devalue things that now we're all like we all feel like we're counting on to thrive or survive in a pandemic. I'm hopeful about the shifts that can mean about what we start to understand about ourselves in the world from this.
Baking is definitely my go-to since this has all been
What is?
Baking, since all of this.
Oh, I know, right? Samadhi, do you have a sourdough starter yet?
So my partner has been trying to make sourdough for a while now, and they've had lots of problems with it. We'll take tips for that later, though.
My life.
We got about 10 minutes left. I want to wrap up with a couple of things. One more attendee they asked a question in a different spot about any other suggestions for how, if you haven't already said it, about how to manage or address loneliness, what this is all kind of unfolding. If there we've addressed it a couple of times, but if there anything else you want to add about that? Then I've got another question.
Well, and I would just say too, and depending on like why you're lonely, or meaning like, is it that you feel like there are people to connect to currently, or whether it's just being able to see them in person. But I also think it's been an opportunity to reconnect with people, whether it's folks from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and such. And so that could be another possible venue too.
I just had a thought that like part I actually even like about that question, whoever asked that, is it seems to come from a place that they love and care about themselves enough that they can even name their loneliness, and that they want that to shift. I go, even if you don't have another soul or person in your life that you can share that with now or touch, I'm like, just that shows enough love and care for yourself that you can empathize and feel this loneliness and want something better for yourself. I think that's very sweet and tender.
Yeah, I really like how you said that, Kelly. I know like we talk a lot about self-compassion, almost as if it was easy. And I think that's maybe an access point for like, how can you access self-compassion? Well, the fact that I care that I'm lonely and want to shift is a way to start. So just be really gentle with yourself. I think validating that loneliness and normalizing it are really important. Like, know that you're not the only lonely person right now. I think most of us are in some ways.
Yeah.
And then we had a somewhat final question. One of our joining us helps run the St. Louis Primetimers, a gay and bi men's older social group. Everything shifted online for them to Zoom and other video types of calls, and they're wondering for any good, but like also like healthy suggestions for discussion topics for their weekly video chats that they're having with their group. It's about 155 or so members that they have at a given time. That
Oh, wow.
out to. Yeah.
My first instinct would probably be to float that out to the members. I mean, 155 people is a lot of people who know and understand that group, and might, if you ask them in a way that you truly expressed, let's open this up or deepen this, you might get some. I mean, look, we have 10 people here, and we found these important. We didn't make up 6 things we thought were important to talk about. We said, hey, what do y'all need? That would be my first instinct. I don't know that I have a better guess than to ask the people.
Yeah, I think people have very different needs in connecting right now. So definitely I like that suggestion. Something else came to mind and is gone.
I'm also a tend to go deep. So I might, if it's not something this group typically does, I'd probably be wondering, I'd lean into the shared experience around the pandemic and start talking about feelings.
Yeah, so that kind of reminded me of what I wanted to say, which is one is I think reframing those check-in questions we do. There's a lot of hey, how are you? And we're all kind of struggling. So I think finding fun and maybe more positive ways to ask those questions. What's one nice thing that you did for yourself today? What's something you're proud of? When did you last feel good? Just come up with creative check-in questions. And I know for me, rituals of sorts are feeling really important right now, because the ones that I normally, now is a transition time. With my cohort graduating, folks are moving away, and I'm I don't have the space or time for those sort of goodbye rituals I used to have. So yesterday, one of my friends hosted a, hey, we're graduating, let's talk about really informal, no structure, but just if you want to share a poem or a song about your last year, or ways that you're processing grief right now. Let's do, we kind of created our own graduation ritual via Zoom. So.
That's lovely.
That's really cool. So this has been, we've got 5 more minutes. Is there any last minute things anyone wants to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm gonna
I
start.
hope that people, I was just thinking about how I've really enjoyed meeting Riot. I've known everyone else. So it just reminds me, and this just may be what gets me through, helps me move through the world. If you don't already know it, whoever you are and whoever you come in touch with, just know there are a lot of really lovely people who love and care about you, even if you don't know them. I assume I probably don't know most of these participants. Just know, there are humans who have room in their hearts to love people they don't know, and that really, we're going to be okay. And it may get very messy and scary and multiple times through that, but that there are a lot of people who wish you well and care about you.
Yeah, because I even was reading a student's paper today, and it was not related to COVID, but what he said is, and this is a paraphrase, that there is a lot of ugliness in the world. They had to watch a video on YouTube that I assigned them, and he's like, but there are pockets, or I call them nuggets, of where you see people aren't, so ugly, and that's where, balancing that out in terms of the news or the folks that are saying this is a pandemic, or disregarding social distancing and all of that. But then I even have to remind myself, no, Chad, focus on the people that do have the masks on, okay? focus on the people that are still doing kindness and
Actually, I think
such.
we're a majority. I think
it depends on your neighborhood. No, and I say that because of like being in Tower Grove, you know, like Tower Grove South. But then I'm thinking of some of my colleagues, and they're out in the more rural areas. No.
right.
Sorry, Kelly. I mean, that's
Sometimes
we'll bounce that out to the audience.
this is familiar to me where I go, no, and someone's like, I'm like, oh.
I've done a lot of work in the legislature and like working with people from the rural areas. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, at least like they're away from other people. They're not living in close quarters like a lot of us are. Like when I walk my dog, I don't wear a mask because like I will just cross the street. But when my mom who lives in Queens is walking her dog, she's like, I'm wearing a mask because people are everywhere. So, but anyway, I think that'll wrap it up for us. Thank you all again so much for joining us for another round of this honoring our well-being panel. I really appreciate it. And for folks watching or for folks joining it a little late, we'll post this recording later. But thank you also all for joining us as well. And we will have another Promo at Home event next week. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
And we'll stay on and debrief a little bit if we need to.